She stood alone at the edge of the ballroom, and not a single person looked at her. Alara Graymore, Duchess of Rothwell, wore a gown of pale silk that had cost more than the cottage she had grown up in. Diamonds shimmered at her throat, heavy as chains. She had spent 2 hours preparing for this evening, her maid pinning her hair into an elegant sweep, her heart fluttering with the fragile hope that tonight might be different. Tonight, perhaps, her husband would see her. But Lucian Graymore did not see her. He was dancing with Lady Celestine Vale, a widow with hair the color of honey and a smile that curved like a blade. His hand rested at her waist with a familiarity that made Alara's stomach clench. He leaned down to murmur something near Lady Celestine's ear, and the widow laughed, a sound that drifted across the room like perfume. Alara gripped her fan until the ivory bit into her palm. She had been married to the Duke of Rothwell for 4 months. In those months, he had touched her exactly once, when he had lifted her veil on their wedding day to press a cold, dutiful kiss to her forehead. She had stood trembling with hope, and he had looked through her as though she were already a ghost. The whispers began, as they always did. "She's the heiress, you know, common blood. The old baron's daughter, but the money came from some trading uncle. The Duke only married her to save Rothwell. Everyone knows the estate was crumbling. Look at him with Lady Celestine. It's almost cruel, isn't it? His poor little Duchess, standing there like a lost lamb." Alara's cheeks burned. She turned her face toward the terrace doors, desperate for air. Her slippers carried her through the crowd of glittering strangers, and no one stopped her. She was invisible. She had been invisible from the moment she had taken the Graymore name. Outside, the night was cool and indifferent. She leaned against the stone balustrade and forced herself to breathe. The stars were bright overhead, utterly unmoved by her humiliation. Below, the gardens of Rothwell House stretched into darkness, perfectly manicured and utterly silent. She heard the doors open behind her, and her heart lurched with foolish hope. But it was not her husband. It was Lord Aidan Graymore, Lucian's younger cousin, who stepped onto the terrace with a look of quiet concern. "Your Grace," he said gently, "are you unwell?" Alara shook her head, not trusting her voice. She liked Aidan. He was the only member of the Graymore family who had ever looked at her with anything resembling warmth, but his kindness tonight felt like salt in a wound. "The air was close," she managed. Aidan came to stand beside her, leaving a respectful distance. "My cousin is blind," he said quietly, "and a fool." Alara's throat tightened. "Please, my lord, don't." "Forgive me," he bowed his head. "I only meant you deserve better." She closed her eyes. She had spent 4 months telling herself the same thing, but hearing it from another person made the truth unbearable. She did deserve better, but she was bound to a man who would never love her, and the hope she had carried into this marriage was slowly, painfully dying. When she returned to the ballroom, Lucian was still dancing with Lady Celestine. He did not even notice she had gone. That night she lay in her vast, empty bed and stared at the canopy above her. The house was silent. Her husband slept in his own chambers, 2 corridors away, as he had every night since their wedding. She pressed her hand over her heart and made a quiet, desperate vow. She would stop waiting for him. The next morning, Alara rose early and dressed without ringing for her maid. She chose a simple wool gown, one she had brought from her father's modest estate, and pinned her hair into a practical knot at the nape of her neck. She had spent the first weeks of her marriage trying to become the perfect duchess. She had studied etiquette, learned the names of every servant, memorized the guest lists, and smiled until her face ached. She had ordered new gowns in the colors Lucian preferred. She had learned his favorite dishes and instructed the cook to prepare them. She had waited, breathless and hopeful, for him to notice. He never had. Today, she would begin a different life. A life where she did not orbit around a man who refused to see her. She walked down to the breakfast room and found Lucian already seated at the head of the long table, a newspaper open before him. He did not look up when she entered. His dark hair was immaculately brushed, his cravat tied with military precision. He was the most beautiful man she had ever seen, and the coldest. "Good morning," she said, taking her seat at the far end of the table. He made a low sound of acknowledgement, his eyes never leaving the paper. Alara poured herself tea with steady hands. The silence stretched between them like a frozen river. In the early weeks she had tried to fill this silence with bright, nervous chatter. She had asked about his day, his horses, his plans. He had answered with monosyllables or not at all. Eventually, she had learned to stop talking. But today the silence did not ache as it once had. She had made her vow. She was no longer waiting. When she finished her tea, she rose and walked toward the door. "I am going into the village," she said without turning around. "There is a family there whose roof collapsed in the last storm. I mean to see it repaired." She did not wait for his response. She did not need it anymore. Lucian finally looked up from his newspaper. He watched his wife straight back as she disappeared through the door, and something flickered in his chest. He did not know what it was. He did not want to know. He returned to his newspaper, but the words blurred before his eyes. Alara's visits to the village became a daily ritual. She used her own inheritance, the fortune that had made her a desirable match, to help those in need. She repaired cottages, bought medicine for the sick, and paid for a young boy's apprenticeship to a carpenter. She sat with elderly widows and listened to their stories. She taught a group of village children to read, using a slate and chalk in the empty parish hall. The villagers, who had initially regarded their new duchess with wary curiosity, grew to love her. They called her Lady Kindness behind her back, and when she walked through the narrow streets, faces lit up with genuine warmth. This was a kind of love she had never expected to find, and it healed something broken inside her. At Rothwell House, she became a ghost of a different kind. She attended meals in silence, spoke politely when spoken to, and no longer lingered in hallways hopping to catch a glimpse of her husband. She stopped wearing the gowns she had ordered for him. She stopped asking the cook to prepare his favorite dishes. She simply stopped. The servants noticed. The housekeeper, Mrs. Hargrove, who had served the Graymore family for 30 years, watched the young duchess with growing concern. "She's fatting," Mrs. Hargrove murmured to the butler one evening, "like a flower in the shade." And still the Duke did nothing. But he began to notice. It happened slowly, the way frost creeps across a window pane. At first, Lucian could not identify what had changed. Meals were quiet, but they had always been quiet. His wife was polite, but she had always been polite. She did not seek him out, but she had learned early that her attention was unwanted. And yet something was missing. A presence. A warmth. The faint scent of lavender that used to trail after her in the corridors was gone, replaced by the simpler scent of soap and fresh air. The hopeful, yearning look in her eyes when she glanced at him across the dinner table had vanished entirely. Now when she looked at him, her gaze was calm, peaceful, empty. One evening he found himself standing in the doorway of the library, watching her read by the fire. She did not notice him. She was absorbed in a book, her head bent, a small smile playing at the corner of her lips. She looked content. She looked happy. And the realization struck him like a physical blow. She was happy without him. He turned and walked away before she could see him, his jaw tight, his chest inexplicably hollow. The first crack in Lucian's armor appeared a week later at a garden party hosted by the Earl of Hertford. Alara attended with her husband, as duty required. She wore a gown of soft blue that brought out the color of her eyes, but she had chosen it herself, without any thought of pleasing him. She walked beside him through the manicured gardens with the serene composure of a woman who had made peace with her life. Lucian stayed close to her side, which was unusual. She did not remark on it. She assumed he had his own reasons, and his reasons no longer concerned her. They were greeted by Lord Aidan, who bowed over Alara's hand with undisguised admiration. "Your Grace, you look radiant today. The country air agrees with you." Alara smiled warmly. "Thank you, my lord. I have been spending a great deal of time outdoors." "So I've heard. The whole village speaks of your kindness." Aiden's grin was easy and genuine. "You put the rest of us to shame." Lucian watched the exchange with a strange, tight sensation in his chest. His cousin was looking at Alara as though she were the sun, and Alara was smiling back with an ease she had never shown to him. "Cousin," Lucian said, his voice sharper than he intended, "I believe Lady Harford is looking for you." Aiden raised an eyebrow but bowed and took his leave. Alara glanced at Lucian with mild surprise. That was abrupt. "He talks too much," Lucian muttered. Alara said nothing, but a small, puzzled line appeared between her brows. She turned away to speak with Lady Harford, leaving Lucian standing alone. The hollow feeling in his chest grew wider. Later that afternoon, he saw her walking through the rose garden with a man he did not recognize. The stranger was tall and fair-haired, with the quiet confidence of someone who had nothing to prove. He leaned toward Alara attentively, and when she laughed at something he said, Lucian felt a hot, foreign emotion surge through his blood. He strode toward them, his boots crunching on the gravel path. Alara looked up, startled by his sudden appearance. "Husband," she said, her tone carefully neutral, "may I present Mr. Nathaniel Greer? He is a solicitor who assisted my father's estate. We are old acquaintances." Mr. Greer bowed respectfully. "Your Grace, I was just telling the Duchess how well she looks." Lucian's eyes flicked over the solicitor with cold assessment. "Indeed. And what business brings you to Harford, Mr. Greer?" "Purely social, Your Grace. Lady Harford is my aunt." Alara touched Lucian's arm lightly, a brief, impersonal contact. "I was just about to take tea on the terrace. Would you care to join us?" The invitation was polite, but there was no hope in it. She did not care whether he accepted. He could see it in her eyes. She was simply being courteous. The jealousy that twisted in his gut was so fierce it nearly stole his breath. He did not understand it. He had never wanted this marriage. He had never wanted her. And yet, the sight of her smiling at another man made him feel as though he were being slowly torn apart. "No," he said roughly, "I have matters to attend to." He turned and walked away before she could see the turmoil on his face. That night, alone in his study, Lucian poured himself a glass of brandy and stared into the fire. He could not stop thinking about the way Alara had looked at Mr. Greer, the warmth in her smile, the easy laughter. She had never looked at him that way. She had never laughed with him. He had not wanted her to. But now, the thought that she might give those smiles to another man filled him with a dark, possessive terror that he could not name. He had been so certain that she would always be there, waiting, hopping, yearning. He had relied on it, perhaps, without even realizing. Her quiet devotion had been a constant, a backdrop to his cold, ordered life. Now that devotion was gone, and he had no one to blame but himself. The following week, Alara received a letter that changed everything. It arrived in the Morning Post, sealed with an unfamiliar crest. She opened it in the privacy of her sitting room, her brow furrowing as she read the cramped, hurried script. "Your Grace, I write to warn you, your husband is not what he seems. He was ordered to marry you by the crown. You are being watched. Search his study and you will find the truth. A friend." The letter fluttered from her fingers. Her blood turned to ice. Ordered to marry her, by the crown, watched. For a long moment she could not breathe. The walls of the sitting room seemed to press inward, the elegant furnishings suddenly alien and menacing. She thought of Lucian's coldness, his distance, his absolute refusal to let her close. She had believed it was indifference, or perhaps resentment for being forced into a marriage of convenience. But this was something far darker. She waited until Lucian rode out to inspect the tenant farms that afternoon. Then, with her heart pounding in her throat, she slipped into his study. The room smelled of leather and brandy. She had never been inside it before. She moved quickly, her hands trembling as she opened drawers and rifled through papers. She did not know what she was looking for. The letter had been maddeningly vague. And then she found it. A black leather portfolio, tucked at the back of a locked drawer she had pried open with a letter opener. Inside were documents bearing the seal of the Home Office. Reports, observations, her name written again and again. The subject continues to show no signs of seditious activity. No contact with foreign agents has been observed. Recommend continued surveillance pending further orders. Her breath caught in a sob. She sank into the chair behind the desk, the papers spread before her like evidence of a crime. Her husband was not merely a cold, distant nobleman. He was her jailer. Her entire marriage was a mission, a lie. She did not know how long she sat there, the documents clutched in her numb fingers. She only knew that when the door opened and Lucian walked in, her eyes were dry and her heart was a stone in her chest. He stopped dead when he saw her. His gaze dropped to the papers in her hands, and the color drained from his face. "Ilara." "Don't." Her voice was low and steady, though it cost her every ounce of strength. "Don't speak to me." He took a step toward her. "Let me explain." "Explain what?" She rose from the chair, the documents falling to the floor between them like dead leaves. "That our marriage was a sham. That you were ordered to watch me like a criminal. That every moment I spent hoping you might one day care for me, you were writing reports about my activities." "It wasn't like that," he said, his voice rough. "I never believed you were guilty. I was forced." "Forced?" A bitter, jagged laugh escaped her. "You were forced to marry me. I understand that now. But you were not forced to let me humiliate myself for 4 months. You were not forced to let me believe I was simply unworthy of your love. You could have told me the truth. You could have shown me one moment of honesty." "I couldn't." His voice cracked, and she saw something raw and desperate flicker in his eyes. "If the Crown suspected I had compromised the mission, they would have removed me and placed someone else in my position. Someone who would not have been gentle." "Gentle?" She stared at him. "You call this gentle?" "I kept you safe." He slammed his hand on the desk and she flinched. He froze, his chest heaving, and then his shoulders sagged. "Forgive me. I never wanted to frighten you. I was ordered to monitor your family because your father was suspected of passing information to the French during the war. When I met you, I knew within a week that you were innocent. But I couldn't stop the investigation. If I had refused the assignment, they would have sent a man far less scrupulous. A man who might have hurt you to extract a confession." She shook her head slowly, tears burning behind her eyes. "You should have told me. You should have trusted me." "I wanted to." His voice was barely a whisper. "But I was a coward. And by the time I realized what I felt for you was real, it was too late. You had already stopped looking at me." The words hung between them, heavy and fragile. Ilara wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. "What you feel for me," she repeated. "You feel nothing for me. You made that perfectly clear." "I made a terrible mistake," he said. "I thought if I kept you at a distance, I could protect you without becoming entangled. But I was already entangled. From the very first night, I was lost." She wanted to believe him. Every broken piece of her heart yearned to believe him. But the papers on the floor were proof of a betrayal too deep to forgive with a few pretty words. "I need to leave," she said. "I need to be away from this house, from you." Panic flared in his eyes. "Ilara, please don't go." "I have a cottage," she said, her voice hollow. "It was part of my inheritance. I will stay there until I decide what to do." "At least let me escort you." "No," she walked past him, pausing at the door. "You have watched me long enough." She left him standing in the ruins of his lies. The cottage was small and whitewashed, nestled at the edge of a wood. Ilara arrived there late in the afternoon, accompanied only by her maid and a single trunk. The air smelled of wildflowers and damp earth, and the silence was a balm to her raw nerves. She spent the first day simply sitting by the window, watching the light shift through the trees. She did not cry. She felt cried out, hollowed, as though someone had scooped out her insides and left only an echoing emptiness. On the second day, she began to sort through the trunks that had been sent from her father's house, things she had never unpacked at Rothwell. Old letters, faded ribbons, a miniature portrait of her mother. And at the bottom of the smallest trunk, tied with a blue silk ribbon, a bundle of letters she did not recognize. She untied the ribbon with trembling fingers. The handwriting on the top letter was elegant and flowing, and the seal was the Graymore crest. My dearest Alara, if you are reading this, then I am gone. I have wanted to write to you for so long, but circumstances have made it impossible. You see, I am your godmother. Your mother was my dearest friend, and when she died, I made a vow to watch over you. The inheritance that came to you was not from a distant uncle. It was from me. I set aside a portion of my own dowry, and your father invested it wisely. I always hoped that one day you might come to Rothwell not as a stranger but as a daughter. And I hoped with all my heart that my son would be worthy of you. Lucian does not know. He believes the inheritance came from your mother's family. He was so young when I died, and his father thought it best to keep the connection secret for political reasons. I regret that secrecy now. Perhaps if he had known, he would not have been so afraid to love you. My darling girl, I give you my blessing, and I pray that one day you will find happiness in the home I always meant for you to have. With all my love, Helena Graymore. The letter slipped from Alara's fingers. She pressed her hand to her mouth, a sob tearing from her throat. Lucian had not known. He had believed the inheritance was tainted by politics and suspicion. He had believed she was the daughter of a possible traitor, assigned to him as a duty. He had never known that his own mother had loved Alara from afar, had given her the means to escape a life of poverty, had dreamed of bringing her into the Graymore family as a cherished daughter. And yet, despite his ignorance, despite his coldness, Lucian had protected her. He had risked his reputation, his standing with the crown, to keep her safe from men who would have treated her far worse. She understood now. The coldness had not been indifference, it had been fear. Fear of failing his mission, fear of endangering her, fear of the feelings he could not control. But understanding did not erase the pain, it only softened its edges. She was still sitting there, the letters scattered around her, when she heard the sound of hoofbeats on the lane outside. She looked up, her heart lurching, and saw a rider dismounting at the gate. A tall, dark figure, moving with urgent, desperate strides. Lucian. He stopped at the door of the cottage, his chest heaving, his hair wild from the ride. Rain had begun to fall, plastering his shirt to his skin. He looked nothing like the cold, immaculate duke she had married. He looked like a man who had ridden through the night, tormented by demons. Alara, he said, his voice raw, please let me speak. She rose slowly, the letter still clutched in her hand. You rode here in the rain. I would have ridden through fire. He stepped forward, and she did not retreat. I resigned my commission with the Home Office this morning. I told them the truth, that you are innocent and that I will no longer be a party to their surveillance. They are not pleased, but I do not care. I am done being a spy. I only want to be your husband. Tears slipped down her cheeks. You lied to me. I did, his voice broke, and I will spend the rest of my life regretting it, but I am begging you, Alara. Give me a chance to make it right. I love you. I have loved you for months, and I was too proud and too afraid to admit it. When I saw you with Greer, I thought I would go mad. When you left, I thought my heart would stop beating. She held out the letter. Read this. He took it, his brow furrowed. As his eyes moved over the words, his face transformed. Shock, disbelief, and then a grief so profound it seemed to fold him in half. He sank onto the stone bench by the door, the letter trembling in his hands. My mother, he whispered. She knew you, she loved you, and I never knew. She wanted us to find each other, Alara said softly. She gave me the means to come to you, but we were both so caught in fear and misunderstanding that we almost lost everything." He looked up at her, his eyes wet. "Can you forgive me?" She stood before him, the rain misting around them, and for the first time she saw him clearly, not as the cold, unreachable Duke, but as a man, flawed and frightened, capable of terrible mistakes, but also capable of sacrifice. He had protected her at his own expense. He had resigned his position rather than continue to deceive her. He had ridden through a storm to fall at her feet. She reached out and touched his rain-soaked cheek. "I think I forgave you the moment you told me the truth. I just needed time to believe it." He caught her hand and pressed it to his lips, his breath warm against her cold fingers. "I will spend every day proving that I am worthy of you, if you will let me." She knelt before him, her gown pooling in the wet grass, and looked into his eyes. "We will prove it to each other," she said. "No more secrets, no more distance. We start again from this moment." A sob of relief broke from him. He pulled her into his arms, burying his face in her hair, and she felt the shudder of his tears against her shoulder. She held him, the rain soaking them both, and she felt the last shard of ice around her heart finally melt. They stayed like that for a long time, two broken people beginning to heal. 3 months later, the Duke and Duchess of Rothwell attended a ball at the very same house where Alara had once stood alone and invisible. But this time, she entered on her husband's arm, and she did not leave his side. Lucian wore no mask of coldness. His hand rested at the small of her back with quiet, possessive tenderness. When Lady Celestine Vale approached with a predatory smile, he bowed politely and turned away without a second glance. "Would you care to dance, my love?" he asked Alara, his voice low and intimate. She looked up at him, her heart full to bursting. "I thought you would never ask." He led her onto the floor, and as the orchestra began to play, he pulled her closer than was strictly proper. The matrons whispered, but neither of them cared. Alara rested her head against his chest and felt the steady, sure beat of his heart beneath her ear. "I spent so many nights dreaming of this," she murmured. "I spent so many nights being a fool," he replied. "But I am done with foolishness. You are my heart, Alara, my only truth." She smiled, and it was the smile of a woman who had walked through fire and emerged into sunlight. Around them, the glittering crowd faded into insignificance. There was only the music and the warmth of his arms and the quiet, unshakable certainty that they had found each other at last. Not because of a mission or a duty or a secret inheritance, but because two hearts, tested by pain and misunderstanding, had chosen to trust again. And that choice, made in the rain outside a small white cottage, would carry them through every season to come. They danced until the candles burned low, until the last guests had gone home, until the servants began to quietly extinguish the chandeliers. And even then, they lingered, swaying together in the dim, golden light, two figures who had once been strangers and were now, finally, home.